My name is Alma, and I will be your host for Unit 3, Social Studies. This program was designed to follow along with the Kaplan GED Test Prep Plus book 2020. You can play, pause, or rewind at any time that you want. Without further ado, let's go ahead and start with Chapter 1 in Social Studies. As a reminder, we will be utilizing the Kaplan GED Test Prep Plus 2020 book for this and all videos offered through the GED On platform. You can find links below to purchase the book at your local store or online. Remember, you can also register your book at captest.com/more-online for additional resources. The social studies test is timed for 70 minutes or 1 hour and 10 minutes. There are a total of 35 questions that will cover a variety of topics within social studies. The topics are broken down as followed: civics and government, U.S. history, economics, and geography and the world. Today, I will be covering Unit 3, Social Studies, Chapter 1, Social Studies Practices, Lessons 1 through 6. Chapter 1 can be found in your Kaplan book starting on page 420. Let's begin with Lesson 1. Determine central idea and draw conclusions. Comprehending social studies material requires understanding the central idea or central point and its supporting details. The central idea of a passage or graphic is its main point. This is the message that the writer wants to get across to the reader. Comprehending social studies requires the ability to infer from the text and to draw conclusions from the text read. What does this mean? This means that the central idea is not stated directly in the passage, but it can be concluded based on the text read, based on the evidence and or details that are being used to support it. Now let's look at our first written example found on page 420. Let's read it together. At the outset of the Revolutionary War, the American colonies had a small navy of 31 ships. To contest the far superior number of vessels in the British fleet, the colonies employed privateers, independent ships authorized to harass and capture enemy merchant and cargo ships. Armed with more than 4,000 guns, American privateers captured well over 2,000 enemy ships. These figures demonstrate how difficult it would have been without the aid of privateers for the colonies to win their independence against a larger, better equipped British Navy. Now let's focus on the question that is being asked. What is the topic of this passage? As a reminder, the main idea or topic is the message that the writer wants to convey to the reader. If you selected A, the importance of colonial privateers to winning the Revolutionary War, you are correct. You can read this directly from the second sentence in the writing, while the remaining of the passage has facts to support the main idea or topic. While option B is true, it is a supporting fact to the main idea, just like the fact stated above it, armed with more than 4,000 guns. As previously mentioned, the central idea is not always found directly in the writing. So in that instance, we have to infer it. A good example of inferring central idea can be found in graphs or charts. In general, graphs or charts usually display 3 different items: a graph title and a relationship between item A and item B. For example, this chart's title is Catching Frogs. We can infer that the chart will probably provide us some sort of number about catching frogs, right? Let's see. The vertical axis is labeled number of frogs caught, and the horizontal axis lists 2 categories, frogs and children. Without any other explanation given, we can infer from the line graph that the number of frogs caught increases with the number of children looking for frogs. For example, you can see that when there was 1 child looking for frogs, that child only caught 4. On the other hand, when there was a total number of children of 8 looking for frogs, they caught 20. That is a huge difference, don't you think?
Let's see if we can find the central idea for this graph. The title of the graph is Bakery Productivity. Right away, we can guess that the chart will give us some information about the number of goodies baked. The vertical axis is labeled number of cakes baked. The horizontal axis is labeled number of bakers and cakes baked. Let's analyze the graph. It seems that as the number of bakers increases, the number of cakes baked increases too. Who knew? Let's read our possible answers. A. The productivity of a bakery is based on a number of factors. B. The productivity of the bakery rises when more bakers are added. I think we can safely assume that the correct answer is B. The productivity of the bakery rises when more bakers are added. Now that we have finished our first lesson, let's complete practice 1A. Practice 1A can be found on page 421.
At this time, please pause the video and read practice 1A found on page 421. When you are ready to start, click play. Now that we have read practice 1A, let's answer the following question. Question 1 asks, which of the following is the topic of the paragraph? A. The superiority of Greek theater. B. The standard forms of Greek drama. C. The characteristics of Greek tragedy. Or D. The most popular Greek tragedies. If you chose C, the characteristics of Greek tragedy, you are correct. The passage focuses on one form of drama, which the writer states directly in the following sentence. Theater was one of the most popular forms of art in ancient Greece, and one form of drama, tragedy, was central to Greek culture. In order to determine if tragedy was the most popular or superior in comparison to other forms, the author would have to present additional forms of drama like comedy and romanticism. Therefore, options A, B, and D are incorrect. Let's move on to question 2. Question 2 asks, which of these details supports the central idea? Our options are A. Theater was one of the most popular Greek art forms. B. Tragedies were more important than comedies in ancient Greece. C. Greeks thought flaws other than hubris were not tragic. D. The main character in Greek drama has a tragic fall that causes his downfall. If you selected D, the main character in Greek drama has a tragic fall that causes his downfall, is correct. This is verified in the second to last sentence. These serious dramas centered on a main character who displayed exceptional attributes but also had a tragic flaw that caused his downfall. The other choices are all too broad or misrepresent what the passage actually said. Now it's your turn to practice. At this time, pause the video, complete practice question 3, and click play when you are ready to continue. Now let's test our knowledge with finding the central idea in graphs with practice 1B found on page 421. At this time, pause the video and study practice 1B, the graph titled Income Sources by Percent for Senior Citizens, found on page 421. When you're ready to restart, click play. Now that you have reviewed the graph, let's answer the following question. The graph answers which of the following questions? Let's look at our options. A. What is the dollar value of the income for senior citizens? B. How much do senior citizens have in savings accounts? C. How many senior citizens are dependent upon veterans' benefits for their retirement income? Or D. Where do the incomes for senior citizens come from? If you chose D, you are correct. Let's examine the graph. The graph does not give any actual dollar amount, nor does it state how many senior citizens there are in the United States. You would need those numbers to answer the questions in choices A, B, and C. At this time, pause the video, complete practice 1B, question 5, and click play when you are ready to continue. Congratulations! You have completed lesson 1. Now let's move on to lesson 2. Interpret words and ideas. As previously mentioned, the central idea or main point is directly stated in a passage or text. However, most of the time, the central idea can be found by its supporting details and understanding key terms and context. Context words, or clues, is a form of information presented to readers in different formats. These clues can be in the form of definitions or explanations. In other words, a word or phrase's meaning is explained immediately after its use. Another form is restatement or synonyms, which means that a complex word can be said in a simpler manner. The final form is inference. You may recall that in lesson 1 we touched briefly on inference, which can be interpreted as drawing conclusions from the passage read. For example, the word articles can be presented in several contexts, such as an article of clothing or an article in the U.S. Constitution. Be aware that words and ideas can also be presented in chronological order, especially in social studies. This allows the reader to understand the events in sequence as they occur in a story or events in history. In addition, social studies analyzes the relationship between cause and effect, meaning that when one event happens, a subsequent event will occur based on the first event. Essentially, by understanding all three concepts, you are ready to conquer social studies. Now, let's look at our first example found on page 422. If you notice, the title of this timeline is Inventions in the 1870s. The dates and events are set in chronological order. Based on the timeline, we can see that the blasting gel was invented prior to other inventions listed, and the last invention that was invented, based on this timeline, was the cash register and the carbon filament light bulb. Now, let's answer the following question using the timeline. Based on the timeline, which of the following events preceded the invention of the carbon arc light bulb? Our possible answers are A, invention of the telephone, B, invention of the carbon filament light bulb. The word preceded means before, and timelines are read left to right from oldest to most recent. Therefore, the carbon filament light bulb was invented after the carbon arc light bulb and the telephone prior to the arc light bulb. So, if you chose A, you are correct. Remember that we talked about cause and effect. Well, here's an opportunity to practice our skills. When analyzing cause and effect, think about two things: what resulted from this action and what made this event happen. For example, as a result of the world pandemic, citizens were urged to stay at home. Now let's look at our second example, found on page 422. Let's read it together. The prices of goods and services are determined by the relationship between supply and demand. When supply exceeds demand, sellers must lower prices to stimulate sales. On the other hand, when demand exceeds supply, consumers bid up prices as they compete to purchase items or services that they desire. Now, let's answer the questions using the paragraph. Based on the theory of supply and demand, under which of the following scenarios would prices be most likely to rise? A, the demand for a product exceeds the product's supply. B, producers and sellers advertise a product in order to stimulate demand for that product. If you chose A, you are correct. B is incorrect, as nowhere in the paragraph was it mentioned that sellers advertise a product to increase sales. On the other hand, the excerpt states that when demand exceeds supply, consumers bid up prices. Now that we have finished our second lesson, let's complete practice 2A, found on page 423. At this time, please pause the video and read practice 2A found on page 423. Now that you have reviewed the passage, let's answer the following question. Question 1 asks, according to the passage, which of the following was a cause of Northern European immigration to the United States in the 1840s and 1850s? Possible answers are A, Americans' desire to double the population of the United States. B, efforts by Northern European governments to reduce the number of people living in poverty. C, political and social instability in some Northern European countries. D, efforts to spread Catholicism to the United States. If you chose C, political and social instabilities in some Northern European countries, you are correct. Question 1 requires you to use cause and effect as it is asking you the cause of Northern European immigration. If you look at paragraph 1, sentence 5 and 6, you can read that political and social instabilities caused the immense number of immigrants to the United States. Question 2 asks, based on the passage, which of the following was most likely to have been featured on a steamship company poster? A, a folk art painting depicting the life of the rural poor in the United States. B, a portrait of an American politician from the 1840s. C, a poster advertising an American product. D, a painting of pioneers settling and farming productive prairie land. If you chose D, then you are correct. Let's review. In question 2, the writer wants you to infer what the posters may have looked like to incite immigrants to move to the United States. Option A is not a possibility as immigrants are trying to leave an impoverished country. Option B is not a viable answer as immigrants may not be aware of current politicians. Option C speaks about products. However, the writer does not mention products used in the United States. Option D paints the best scenario as it portrays people that resemble immigrants thriving in a foreign country. You may now pause the video to complete question 3. Click play when you are ready to continue. Now, let's apply what we learned on timelines on practice 2B, page 423. At this time, review the Great Dust Bowl. When you are ready to continue, click play. Yay, you're back. Let's read question 4. Given the information in the timeline, which of the following will be a flawed inference? Mechanized farming contributed to dust storms. Internal migration led to overgrazing. Severe drought contributed to black blizzards. Some farmers left the Dust Bowl before the worst dust storm hit the region. If you chose B, internal migration led to overgrazing, you are correct. According to the timeline, aggressive agriculture began in 1930, which led to the black blizzards and caused overgrazing in 1931. Internal migration occurred in 1933. Therefore, option B is incorrect. Let's move on to question 5. Which of the following could have been a cause of the Great Dust Bowl? Our options are A, black blizzards, B, internal migration, C, depleted topsoil, D, failed farms. If you selected C, you are correct. This can be found on the timeline between 1925 to 1930. It states that farms experimented with aggressive mechanized farming techniques, increasing productivity, but depleting the topsoil, which in effect was the cause of the Great Dust Bowl. The black blizzards, internal migration, and failed farms were the effects of depleted topsoil. Congratulations! You made it to the end of lesson 2. Let's move on. Now, we will be moving on to lesson 3, Analyze author's purpose and point of view. Remember that every book, story, and article has a purpose. The purpose is the reason why something was written. Social studies material is written to inform, educate, or persuade. Informing a reader is to convey information that the reader may not know. For example, this can be the pamphlets at a museum. Educating is teaching the reader. For example, a cookbook is educational material because it is essentially teaching you how to follow recipes to prepare great meals. And persuading. Persuading is trying to convince the reader to believe an idea. For example, this can be a newspaper article listing the pros in completing the United States Census. All reading material has a point of view. This is the way the author feels about the subject written. As a reader, it is our responsibility to identify the writer's point of view, especially if we are using their material as a point of reference. We need to be able to identify if the writer has a bias. A bias is a tendency to see only one point of view. We all have biases about how we feel about a certain subject, especially in politics. But we will not get into that right now. Not all biases are bad, but we need to be careful. If there is an extreme form of bias in a writing, it is then called propaganda. Propaganda is the author's approach to convince readers to act and think as he or she. In propaganda, authors normally select which facts they want to present to the writer and ignore the opposition. They can also use words that will elicit an emotional response. Now, let's look at our first example and see if we can recognize the point of view and the purpose of the author. Let's read the passage together. Until the 1980s, most anthropologists mistakenly estimated the native population in North America at the time of Columbus's expedition in 1492 to be somewhere between 2 million and 7 million people. They based these estimates on the number of Native Americans alive at the time of their first contact with European explorers and settlers. However, the estimates ignored the impact of infectious disease such as smallpox, which traveled much faster than humans did, and would have decimated the native population before Europeans made contact with the native people. Now that we have read the passage, let's answer some questions. Question 1 asks, what is the author's point of view about the population of North America in 1492? Option A is that it was not exactly 2 million people or 7 million people, but was somewhere in between these two numbers. Option B, that it was probably much larger than 7 million people. If you chose B, you are correct. The author points out a reason to think that anthropologists prior to the 1980s undercounted the population of Native Americans as many died due to infectious diseases. Question 2 asks, which of the following words is a clue to the author's viewpoint? Our options are A, ignored, B, estimated. If you chose A, ding 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 ding, you are correct. You have won $1 million. Just kidding. The author states the anthropologists ignore the impact of deadly diseases which travel faster than humans. Okay, it's your turn to practice. Now that we have finished our lesson, go to practice 3, located on page 425. At this time, please pause the video and read practice 3, found on page 425. When you're ready to start, click play. Welcome back. Let's read question 1. Which of the following best describes the poster's use of the word victory? A, ambiguous, B, informative, C, propagandistic, D, impersonal. If you chose C, propagandistic, you are correct. The poster is targeting the emotions of American citizens, asking them how they will support and participate in victory. Question 2 asks, what is meant by the poster's caption, "Every garden a munition plant"? A. War gardens require a great deal of time to cultivate. B. Citizens who plant war gardens encourage a sense of community in their hometowns. C. Citizens who plant war gardens help supply the war effort with essential resources. D. War gardens provide an excellent opportunity to learn about gardening, canning, and food drying. If you chose C, citizens who plant war gardens help supply the war effort with essential resources, you are correct. The passage explained that citizens were encouraged to plant their own gardens and self-sustain. Therefore, the government could use its limited resources to feed and equip soldiers, sailors, and airmen. At this time, pause the video, complete practice questions 3 to 4, and click play when you are ready to continue. Congratulations! We are now on lesson 4. Evaluate author's reasoning and evidence. In the past lessons, we reviewed the author's purpose and viewpoints for the writing. This time, we are going to focus on the reasoning behind their viewpoints. How do they support their writing? Let's find out. An author can use a series of concepts to support their writings. These can be facts, opinions, and judgment. A fact is information that can be proven to be true. For example, no one can dispute, well, at least now, that the world is round. Opinions are beliefs about a concept or situation. I can tell you that apple juice tastes better than orange juice, but that is my own biased opinion. Maybe you prefer OJ. Judgments are conclusions that are supported by reason and evidence. For example, workplace productivity will increase when management balances goals with realistic timelines. This is based on evidence that by understanding the employee's workload and removing some of the pressure placed on them with projects may increase their productivity and reach the expected goal. On the GED test, you will be asked to read statements and distinguish them between three concepts. You will also be asked to answer questions to determine if the author's claims were supported by evidence. Let's practice with example 1A and 1B. Both examples can be found on page 426. Example 1A is asking us to label the following statements as a fact, an opinion, or a judgment. Statement 1 reads, "Because it raises the amount employers will pay in payroll taxes, the new tax bill may contribute to higher unemployment." Statement 2. Last year, manufacturing output in our state rose by 4.6% over the previous year. And Statement 3 reads, "We should limit the role played by the federal government in formulating energy policy for a region of the country." We can conclude that Statement 1 is a judgment as it is supported by what it states. With the tax bill, employers have to pay more in payroll taxes, and in order to counteract this, they will have to let go of their employees to minimize their labor force. We can conclude with Statement 2 that it is a fact. This statement can easily be checked with data from last year. Statement 3 looks like an opinion. It is a recommendation that the author is making, but there is no evidence how the policies will affect his or her region. Now, let's read example 1B. Delaware was the first state to ratify the U.S. Constitution. Because of its history of favorable corporate tax policies, Delaware today is home to 63% of Fortune 500 corporations. There is no doubt, then, that Delaware's Freedom of Information Act, requiring the state government to respond within 15 days of a request, should serve as a model for similar acts in other U.S. states. Now, let's answer the question. Does the author support the claim of the passage? A. Yes, because he believes and asserts that there is no doubt about the truth of the claim. B. No, because he asserts the truth of the claim without offering evidence relevant to the claim. If you chose B, you are correct. The author's claim is that the Delaware's Freedom of Information Act is no doubt the best, but there is no evidence supporting its claim. You can also determine that this is the author's opinion by using keywords. In this instance, the author used no doubt, which generally means the author is stating an opinion. Let's move on. Now that we have finished our lesson, let's practice. Go to page 427 and practice 4A. At this time, pause the video and read practice 4A and answer question 1. Analyze a cartoon referencing the labor movement of the early 20th century and answer question 2. When you are ready to start, click play. Hey, you're back. Sorry, I was having a snack. Okay, let's get back to work. Question 1 asks, which of the following is an opinion and not a fact presented by the consultant? Let's read our options. Option A, damming the Mekong could solve Cambodia's energy problems. B, the Mekong River flows through several countries before reaching Cambodia. C, Cambodia experienced civil war. D, millions of Cambodians were killed in the late 1970s. If you chose A, you are correct. Options B through D can be verified by researching in geography and historical books. However, option A is not supported by any evidence or data. Question 2 asks, which of the following represents the viewpoint of the cartoonist? A, strikes can achieve better working conditions. B, strikes have a detrimental impact on workers. C, farm workers are more likely to engage in strikes than are factory workers. D, strikes should hamper production. If you selected B, that's correct. The cartoon shows a laborer using a strike saw as a means of cutting production. By him sitting on the wrong side of the branch, when production is completely stopped, he will fall off. Ergo, strikes have a detrimental impact on workers. At this time, pause the video, complete practice questions 3 to 4, and click play when you are ready to continue. Hi, welcome back to Lesson 5. Analyze relationships between materials. Many times in social studies, information is presented to the reader in graphic forms. What does that mean? It means that circle graphs or pie charts, line graphs, bar graphs, and maps are used to connect or build a relationship between topics. Circle graphs show up percentages or parts divided out of a whole. Line graphs are used to display change over a time as a series of data points connected by a straight line. Bar graphs are to compare change over a series of time. This can be found in everyday life, such as your electricity or water bill. Utility companies include a bar graph in your monthly utility bill to provide you with information on how your water electricity consumption compares to months or years prior. And last but not least, maps. Maps are drawings that show places and regions. Maps usually contain a legend or a key to explain symbols, a compass to indicate directions, and a scale to determine distances. Now, let's look at an example of a map and how it can be utilized to provide information. The map with the legend can be found on page 428. As you can see, the map is shaded in different patterns. To determine the meaning of the patterns, take a look at the legend on the right-hand side of the map. Each pattern is assigned a different type of climate. So let's read the question. According to the map, what is England's climate? Okay, so let's locate England. By locating England, we can see that the pattern assigned is a solid shade of gray, which corresponds to the mild and humid climate. Therefore, the answer is A, mild and humid. Let's put our skills to use. Let's look at practice 5.1. Practice 5.1 can be found on page 429. At this time, analyze the line graph, total third-party presidential election support, 1960 through 2012, on practice 5.1, and answer questions 3 and 4. When you're ready to restart, click play. Welcome. Okay, so bear with me. We're almost done. Let's move on. So question 3 asks, based on the graph, you may validly infer that support for third-party candidates blank during the 1980s and 1990s. Our options are A, steadily increased, B, steadily decreased, C, neither increased nor decreased, and D, fluctuated. Okay, so when we refer to the line graph on page 429 and locate the period between 1980s and 1990s, we notice that third-party support increased, decreased, and increased once again, kind of like a roller coaster. Given what we learned, we can non-arguably state that the answer is D, fluctuated. Let's move on to question 4. Question 4 states, the graph can be used to disprove which of the following claims. Our options are, third-party candidates have not enjoyed significant support in the 21st century. The third-party candidate who garnered the most support since 1960 was Ross Perot in 1992. Third-party candidates have never captured more than 10% of the popular vote in any presidential election. In most elections, all third-party candidates combined get less than 5% of the popular vote. Okay, those are pretty good choices. Now let's see which one best fits our answer. Option A states that the third party has not seen an increase in support in the 21st century, which is true. Support has not increased over the 5% baseline in the 21st century. Therefore, this is not our answer. Option B states that presidential candidate Ross Perot has had the highest support since 1960s, which is correct. So again, B is not our answer. Option C states that candidates for the third party have never had more than 10% support. According to our line graph, there were 3 instances when the candidates reached 10% or higher. That was in 1968, 1992, and 1996. So this is false. I think we might have found our answer, but just in case, let's look at our last option. D reports that when all third-party candidates combine, they get less than 5% of the popular vote, which is correct. So this is not the correct answer. By using the process of elimination, we can now say 100% that our answer is C. Third-party candidates have never captured more than 10% of the popular vote in any presidential election. At this time, pause the video, complete practice questions 5.1 and 5.2. Click play when you are ready to continue. Welcome! You made it to our last lesson, Lesson 6, Interpret Data and Statistics. Hang in there, we're almost there.
Okay, so when you think data and statistics, you think about math, right? So no one told me that I would have to use math in social studies. Well, they lied. And here I am, applying math to social studies. But no worries, we'll get through this. You may be wondering, why do we need math in social studies? Hey, I'm wondering the same thing. So we're on the same boat. So let's find out why. Understanding social studies requires us to do some calculations to analyze data and statistics that are presented to us so that we can interpret graphs, make comparisons, and spot trends. For example, a trend here in Arizona could be the monsoons or haboobs. Yeah, that looks scary. I hope you've never been in one of them. So we know that during the Arizona summer, we have the haboobs, and during that monsoon season, we can expect an increase in rain and harsh driving conditions. Okay? If you need additional assistance with your mathematical skills, listen, I know I did, so there's no shame. You can visit Unit 2, Mathematical Reasoning, pages 280 through 308, just to get a refresher. Now let's look at our example on page 432. Let's look at the Franklin County Family Finances graph. The graph displays the median income, average percentage of taxes, and average percentage of savings for a family of 4 in Franklin County over the course of 4 years. Now the question asks, what is the average arithmetic mean percentage of income that a family of 4 in Franklin County saved each year between 2009 and 2012? In order to answer the question, we will need to find the column addressing the average percentage of savings. There we go. We found it. So now that we have found it, we will need to add the totals for all 4 years. So that will be 5.2% plus 6% plus 5.5% and 5.1%. And then divide that total number by 4. You may be asking, where did I get that number for? Well, because there are only 4 years that are being made available to us. By doing this simple mathematical question or equation, we can determine that the average or mean is 5.45%. Therefore, the answer is A. We finished our lesson. See? Nothing to it. Let's move on to practice 6, page 433. At this time, analyze the chart titled America Becomes Urbanized. Answer questions 3 and 4, and when you're ready to start, click play. All right, my friends, we're almost done with our first chapter. Let's be the little train that could and finish strong, right? So question 3 asks, according to the bar graph, in what year were there approximately as many Americans living in rural locations as there were in urban settings? Our options are A, 1860, B, 1910, C, 1920, or D, 1930. If we look at our options using the chart, we can see that in 1860, the rural population was higher than the urban population. In 1910, there was only a 5 million difference between the urban and rural population. And in 1930, the urban population reached its peak. By using the chart and analyzing our options, the best answer to this question is C. During the 1920s, there was an almost equal amount of urban and rural populations. We're almost there. Yes. Question 4. Approximately how much larger was the range of the urban population than the range of the rural population of the United States between 1860 and 1930? Wow, that's a mouthful. That's a very long and it could be a complicated question, but don't worry. We got this, and I'm going to walk you through it. In order to find the answer, we are going to do some mathematical reasoning or some arithmetic. This is a two-part solution, so stay focused. Let's start. The average rural population in 1930 was 54 million, and in 1860, it was 25 million. We are going to find the range between these 2 years. In order to do that, we are going to subtract 25 from 54, which gives us 29 million. The average urban population in 1930 was 68 million, and in 1860, it was 5 million. We are now going to find the range between these two time frames, just like we did earlier. The range is 63 million. Okay, so now that we have the ranges for both urban and rural populations from the 1860s and the 1930s, let's move on. So now we are going to subtract 29 from 63, which gives us our answer, 34 million. See, it wasn't that hard. I know. But don't worry. Like I said, if you need a refresher, go back to Unit 2, and you can always come back to Social Studies. Okay? So at this time, pause the video, complete practice questions 1 to 2, click play when you are ready to continue. We did it, guys. Yes, I'm so proud of you. So we have completed Unit 3, Social Studies, Chapter 1. Now we're moving on to Chapter 2, U.S. History. I will see you soon.